and nevertheless they did it thousands of years ago. Then again, mainstream says that Tiahuanaco is only 2,000 years old. They really don't know why. It's because they relate it to the culture that was supposedly living there 2,000 years ago. As I said, there were resettlements of these things, including the Spanish, which resettled many of these cities and constructed Spanish cities on top of these. So this has happened many times. Well, these archaeologists came to Tiahuanaco some decades ago, and he noticed that the sun gate, which is this famous structure through which the sun in the spring equinox, through which the sun rises through. It has two pillars on both sides of it, and on one pillar it would make sense that the summer solstice would come out of, and the other pillar the winter solstice. But then this wasn't how it turned out to be, because today's solstices actually come out a little bit further out. And so this guy actually using a computer generated program, he calculated at what point in time would have the solstices would have come out at the exact points at which the columns were set, and the number was 17,000 years ago. Due to modern technology, they actually think that it's 12,000 years ago that this was actually perfect exact alignment on which the solstices and equinoxes would come out. So this side is probably not 2,000 years, based upon just a mere theory of relating cultures and time frames. Relating the real astronomical, we know that these cultures guided all their culture was guided through astronomical events and processes, which to me seems pretty advanced to know that they actually depended on looking out to space and bigger things than themselves to control them. Just like a system depends on the bigger system, a biological system depends on other biological bigger systems to survive. So it makes sense to me that we would take that as a reference, astronomical and bigger events than ourselves, to create a modern organized structure. But anyway, so this is another interesting fact, and we already know through the Japan ruins that it is totally possible for man to have constructed such sites before 10,000 BC. Also, Peru, Pumapunku, I believe it's also in Bolivia, has the same huge stone blocks. And what's really interesting is that the stone indentations they found in Tiahuanaco, which molten metal was poured into, were exactly the same shape and exactly the same form in which megalithical blocks in Egypt were constructed and brought together. Now just explain that to me, how this knowledge went from one culture to the other. Either one whole culture actually gave origin to these, and knowledge and origin and science and constructing techniques to these branching off cultures, or they communicated each other or came out of the same thing. Who knows? You can take your own opinion on that, but the fact is they had the same constructing techniques in many ways. In Egypt, in these temples, they would pour the same molten metal, and the indentation would be exactly the same shape, which is a double inverted T, one T on one block and the T on the other. And not only that, the constructions in Egypt are another incredible mystery, because, well, yeah, they dated Egypt back to 3000 BC or something like that, and historians and Egyptologists, they have their theories, but a couple of researchers have done some serious research in there and have come up with contradictory theories that mainstream Egyptologists just don't want to debunk their own belief systems and findings, so they pretty much put them aside. But the constructions in Egypt have also 200-pound blocks and 100-pound blocks, and the obelisks, the famous obelisks, real tall structures they use to represent God energy coming into the temples. That's why they use them in the temples. These obelisks, which are amazing because they're 60 meters, I wouldn't know, but they're 60 meters, I believe, tall. Might be feet, but I think it's meters. I haven't seen one in person, but they're amazing. And they found that they were many in the Temple Valley. They were made out of this kind of stone that was almost as hard as granite. and the only place which this stone was found in was 600 miles away. So they have had to go 600 miles, and they went 600 miles and found one obelisk unfinished. It was constructed in the site and then transported. The reason why this one remained there was that something happened and it broke it in two, but it was already more than halfway done, and they actually did a ditch in the ground and would start constructing it, and then would cut it out of the ground, lift it, and transport it 600 miles, which is pretty unreasonable to me to think that they didn't have a wheel to do that. But anyway, that's Egyptologists seem to think. So either they didn't have a wheel and they had something much more practical, and that again would lead to question our beliefs on those cultures. But the interesting thing is that I heard an interview of this other researcher, an English researcher. I don't recall, I didn't write down his name right here, but it was a really documented interview, and he wrote a book. I'll tell it the next episode. I'll say probably who he is. And he went there and he studied this, and turns out that the theory about how they constructed these blocks is that they used this harder stone, and they would mash it into the ground to shape the obelisk. He did the mathematical calculation of how much time it would take for this stone to be made if one by one, side by side, men one aside crouching down would just bolt this into the ground, how long it would take. 20 hours a day work to construct one single obelisk. The result was 80 years just for one, and that's just improbable, because Egyptologists themselves say that the pyramids were just constructed in 80 years, so it doesn't make any sense. But just for one obelisk, so that doesn't account for it. And so the reason they don't know doesn't mean their theories must be posted out there. If the theory doesn't make any sense, don't post it out there. The theory is supposed to be something that makes at least some sense. And since these calculations don't make any sense, really they shouldn't be out there and taught to people in that way or fashion. An interesting fact, which I don't know is a fact, and I probably don't know if it was true, but I think it's interesting, is that these obelisks this unfinished obelisk, you also can find the picture on YouTube or the internet, seems to have some scoop marks on the top of it. Not as if it was mashed into as a rock was smashed into it to form it, more like if it was molded into its current shape. But this is obviously impossible because the stone was so hard. But it turns out that in South America there are stories, and local people actually believe that many of the structures that fit so perfectly together were done using a mixture of things that ancient cultures knew about, which would soften the rock, make it moldable, and then when this dried up, it would harden again. This seemed impossible until a few years ago, when modern scientists discovered some kind of chemical which they used they made out of hydrogen and something else. I don't remember the name, but it is there. And when this chemical is poured into some rocks, these rock materials will actually melt just as if they were lava, and when it dried out they would harden up just like lava. So it doesn't seem that far-fetched. What if these cultures actually used, instead of cutting, they actually used some of these techniques? Probably not all of them, but it would account for the scoop marks. That it would. And then again, we think of technology, all of it, as hard and powering tools, but sometimes technology can be knowing how to work the ways of physics, to, instead of using strength, using intelligence to do things and realize things. On the other hand, there's the Giza pyramids. They thought they were constructed at a certain point in time, and some archaeologists actually think that they predate the period in time we think. Why they predate this is because they found that there were two pyramids lined up north-south direction, and the third one was put a little northeast. And they said, why did this emperor want to distinguish himself? Pharaoh want to distinguish himself. But then they found two other archaeological pyramids far away, northeast one, and the other one is southwest. Don't remember the Egyptian names, but these guys actually occurred to them to put them in a sky view, and if you put the pattern together, the 5 pyramids actually make up the Orion constellation pattern. Exactly, just in scale, but it's the same pattern. The 3 belts and the other stars, principal stars. And we already know that Egyptians gave, and other cultures gave, as I said before, great importance to the Orion constellation for some reason. And inside the Egyptian pyramid, actually, there are some shafts that point out to the sky, and they always thought it were for ventilation until they actually realized that they pointed to certain specific constellations that are really important to these cultures. Why they were used those shafts, they still don't know. And they originally thought too that these pyramids were tombs, but obviously they had other intentions, since they were astronomically positioned, and they were clearly, I mean, not clearly, it's not a fact again, but common sense just makes you wonder, why would they do that just for a tomb when there were obviously mathematical things involved and stuff. And for example, the inner chamber of the biggest pyramid, where the tomb is supposed to be, this is halfway up the pyramid, and they had to have brought in the coffin. What is supposed to be the coffin is a huge thing, one-piece construction with optical precision. Again, the angles and the flatness of it is so impressive that you can't just picture a guy just molding it with another stone tool to do it. And again, this is a single piece monument, so it had to be brought up there, put up there, and they'll sealed in. And it's kind of weird to me. I mean, it's just, I think it's fantastic. I think it's incredible that they could do these things. And it's just like the tip of the iceberg, what we think they were able of, or capable of.